Now, it is time for the 10th feature session on Korean Wave for Engagement and Empowerment, co-hosted by Wellesley College and Yonsei University. This session will be moderated by Professor Sun-Hee, Professor and Director of Korean Program at Wellesley College. Welcome, Professor Lee.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And let me introduce our panel. And our panel is focusing on Korean language and also Korean Wave and its connection to engagement and empowerment for SDGs. So today we have three panel presentations. So let me briefly introduce our first presenter, Dr. Mark Peterson. He's the Professor Emeritus at Brigham Young University in Utah and Harvard. He got the PhD from Harvard, and also he served in very numerous positions related to Korean language and also education and Korean study, including Fulbright Korean American Educational Commission in Seoul. Also, he was the first vice president of International Association for Korean Language Education, IACO, and also he is the founding member of the American Association of Korean Teachers, AATK, and also a lifetime member of the Royal Asiatic Society Korea branch. And Dr. Peterson has numerous, author of numerous books and articles and journal papers, but one interesting fact, current fact, is that he's a YouTuber with quite large followers. So his YouTube channel featuring the programs on Korean history and culture, and the title of the channel is The Frog Outside the Well. So, I hope that audience can check that. Our last presenter is Dr. Sahie Kang. She is the professor and director of the School of Korean at Middlebury College since 2014. And Dr. Kang is specialized in second language pedagogy and assessment, and also curriculum design and learning language analysis and discourse analysis. And before she arrived at Middlebury, she also served as the Dean of Advanced Language School, Korean and also Arabic School at Defense Language Institute. And also, she also holds that numerous important positions, leading position in the area of Korean education, including President of AAK and Vice President of IACO. So, and let me introduce also myself as a second presenter, and I'm Sun-Hee Lee at the Wellesley College and belonging to Department of East Asian Language and Cultures. So we are all happy here and then talk about the relation with SDGs and also Korean language. So our first presentation by Dr. Peterson, and he will talk about learning Korean for engagement and empowerment. So please, Professor Peterson, would you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. Let me put up my, here it is, my PowerPoint here. Oh, that's the end one. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Yes. In our panel discussion, we're focusing on the Korean Wave, and the part of it is Korean language education as a symbol of engagement and empowerment. And I'm going to take the position that there are very few things that are more empowering and more engaging than second language education. And I'm very much interested in second language education. I've taught for 35 years in a language department, also taught history. But the idea of learning a second language literally doubles the amount of engagement and the amount of empowerment an individual would have, because they're working in two languages and they're learning a new language to broaden and strengthen their kind of interaction with other people. Language learning is the very heart of engagement, but it's declining in the United States. Statistics on language learning show that language learning is dropping radically these days. And it's rather unfortunate. It might be a product of our digital age. Not only that we're spending too much time with our faces in the computer and in the iPhone, but the computer and the iPhone can be used for learning language or for speaking language. I have an iPhone watch, and I didn't know it when I bought it, but I found out fairly recently it will speak 8 languages. So why should I study a second language when I've got 8 languages right here on my watch? And I can say, let me see if I can do it. Siri, I don't know how to do it. Siri, if I ask Siri how to say, what day is it today in Korean, she'll tell me. If I say, what day is it today in Japanese, she'll tell me. If I say, what day is it today in Spanish, she'll tell me. If I say, how do you say I love you in French, she'll say, je t'aime. And so you can learn you can use any language just off your watch or off your iPhone or dedicated devices for speaking that sort of way. So it's a strange thing that we are losing our ability to learn a second language. Now, I'm speaking of the United States. I don't have statistics for Korea. I don't know if Korea is expanding. I think my intuition is that Korea is getting better and better at English as a second language. And so what I'm saying about decline of second language in Korea might be the opposite in decline of second language in America might be the opposite situation in Korea. And so on the other hand, these kinds of digital devices are probably being used in some circles in America for limiting interest in learning a second language. But on the other hand, these devices have great advantages for helping us to learn a second language, because there's all kinds of practice you can do. You don't have to go to the language lab. You don't have to do anything except talk to your watch. You know, how do you say this? How do you say that? And another interesting thing about it is you can critique the language that you get off of your watch. What I'm laughing about is the watch usually speaks Panmal. And so if you learn a phrase off your watch and you say to a dignified gentleman or a nice woman in Korea, 어떻게 여기 가나? How do you get to this train station? 어떻게 가나? That's the kind of phrasing that it gives you on the watch. So you can use the watch or the electronic devices to help you to understand and to learn language, and not just to avoid learning a second language. One of the biggest advantages to learning second language, this is more in the area of empowerment than engagement. I'll talk about engagement first and then empowerment. This is more in empowerment. And that is, there are interesting studies that show your brain power increases by learning a second language. Children who are in immersion schools where they learn in 2 languages growing up, studies have shown their IQ or other measures of intelligence and capability increase through having a second language. And so that's a great incentive for empowerment and using second language learning as a way to improve your abilities, your skills. And it actually shows that it changes the structure and the power of your brain to operate. So foreign language learning has its advantages, even in this digital age. It increases your brain power, but it also helps you to understand other cultures. And when you say culture, it means everything. There is nothing that is not culture in another country. You can talk about technological culture, you can talk about medical culture, but the heart of culture, whichever culture you're talking about, is language. Language is the heart of culture. So of all of the things you need to learn for functioning in this world, language is one of the most important ones. To learn about a foreign culture, there's nothing more important than the spoken language of the people of that culture. Let's look at a couple of concrete examples. Learning Korean connects one with immediately 95 million more people. This is the essence of engagement, to be able to reach more people through being able to speak their language. And yet we have this decline of enrollments I mentioned in the US. I don't have recent statistics. It's hard to find recent statistics. It's very hard to get these statistics. But the thing that's really interesting about the decline of enrollments is one of the last measures we have is in 2016, 5 years ago. And 3 years before that, when they did the measurement, all languages had declined except for Japanese and Korean in 2013. In 2016, all language enrollments declined except for Korean. Japanese also declined between 2013 and 2016. So on the bright side of the decline of enrollments in the US again, it'd be interesting to have the statistics for Korea. The interesting thing is that Korean enrollment is increasing. Why? I think it's the Korean wave. I think it's this pop culture phenomenon that Korea is today. The Academy Award Best Picture going to a foreign language film that you have to read as you go to the film. First time that a foreign language film was considered in the regular category, not just in the foreign category. The Korean film wins Best Picture. And Squid Game, I hate that show. It's a disgusting show, but everybody loves it. It is very intriguing. I couldn't stand the violence angle of it, but the fact that it is so successful, not just a little bit successful, but in Netflix, on their measurement, it had 1.6, I guess it's billion views. I don't know where the decimal place is. It's 1.6. And the greatest number of views a show it had before was 6 million. And this is 16 million or billion or wherever the decimal place is. So a time and a half bigger than any other of the best playing shows that have come out. And then there's BTS and the music groups. So because of the Korea wave, enrollments in Korean language schools all across America have skyrocketed. I've heard it's true of other schools, but I can speak personally of our school at BYU. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, we had a hard time holding a 101 class because you need a certain minimal enrollment. You needed 15. Well, we'd get 12 and we go beg the dean, oh, if we can't get 101, how can we go on? And the dean would say, okay, you can have it at 12. We'd get 10. And the dean would say, no, you need 15. We'd say, oh, please let us carry it. And they'd say, okay, you can carry it. So we've been begging to keep our 101 enrollments going. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now with 15 per class, we first had 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and now we've got 6 sections of 101. Now that's a real measure of the kind of skyrocketing. I use the word skyrocket because that's a pretty good description of how the Korean wave has affected Korean language learning in the United States. And I don't know, Professor Lee, maybe you can tell us what's happened in Wellesley in the last 10 years, or Professor Kang, I know you know of similar things in the enrollments that you do at Middlebury. So that's about engagement. Let's look at the concept of empowerment and language as empowerment. Empowerment, of course, follows engagement. The language is the key to both engagement and to empowerment. It's where it all begins. You can't have engagement without language. You can't have any sort of power without language. And we use the phrase all the time in American culture of words matter. And you see it in the political circles, you know, I didn't mean to say that, you know, the politicians will hedge around there, but words matter. And words are the essence of empowerment. We speak of the power of the written word or the power of the spoken word. So words indeed have power, the heart of empowerment. And the words in a second language have twice as much power. you have twice as much empowerment through learning a second language. Let me tell you a personal experience about the power and the value and the rewards, actually, of speaking a second language. I hope two things: that in this digital age of translation and digital communication, we can understand each other better. And I hope that we do not solely rely on these electronic devices, but we actually take the time to learn a second language. So let me finish with the anecdote of one thing that I experienced in the engagement and empowerment of language. And it came through a poem, of all places, through the beauty of a poem. Now, Professor Kang at DLI knows very well that the American government has a 4-stage level of difficulty of languages, and Korean is a level 4. It's one of the most difficult languages that American English speakers have to learn. And one of the levels, one of the measures of being at level 4 is the ability to understand poetry. Poetry is the crowning achievement of literature. So let me tell you a poem story to tell you about the power and the engagement of literature. I was asked to go to a conference in San Francisco, and after the sessions of the first day, we all met for a banquet at a Korean restaurant that evening. Most of the participants at the banquet at the conference were Korean Americans. There were just a handful, I think only 3 non-Koreans present at the meeting. The man who was sitting across from me was a man I'd never met before, and he asked what my role in the conference was. He said, "What are you doing here?" And I told him I was a professor of Korean history and literature at BYU in Utah. And he seized on the word literature. And he could have asked me about history, he could have asked me about Utah, but he seized on the idea of literature. And he said, somewhat skeptically, he asked what I, a non-Korean, would know about Korean literature. And I said, well, I've read some Korean short stories and I know some poems like Shijo. He seized on the word Shijo. He said, oh, you know Shijo? Let's hear one. He was right in my face. He was challenging me to see if I really knew something or not. And we're speaking in Korean. And so I began reciting in Korean, Imomi chugo chugo, ilbekmon kocho chugo, pekori chinto deo, about halfway through the poem. At about this point, I noticed the room in this busy banquet hall had fallen silent. It didn't fall silent all of a sudden, it happened in ripples. I could feel and hear that it grew silent around me, and the silence spread across the banquet table to the other end of the banquet table. And my voice was the only thing that could be heard, but rather it was the poem that was being heard. Nokshirado ikwoko nimhyanghan ilpentanshimya kashijuri surya. When I finished, one of the other guests, one of the other non-Koreans who did not speak Korean, asked in front of everyone if I could do it in English. And I said, yeah, certainly. And I said, though I die and die again, though I die 100 times, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul exists or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. There was a gasp in the room. There was a gasp. I heard someone suck in air like that. And we have an expression in English that when something happens that grabs everybody's attention, we say it sucked the oxygen out of the room. If you're in a busy place and a lot of people, and a famous person comes in, a movie star, somebody shows up, or politician, everybody's quiet. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. This poem sucked the oxygen out of the room. In Korean, we say kiga makyo. I mean, it took my breath away. I couldn't breathe. And that's what had happened. This one person, the one American who asked to hear the poem, when I finished the poem, I could hear her gasp like that. Well, the poem had taken over the room, and I realized the poem, the spoken word, has power. And that was a valuable lesson to me. And I reflected on that experience in thinking of today's theme, engagement and empowerment. I know how, I look at that poem and how it engaged the busy banquet participants. And I look at the empowerment of the words, the message of loyalty over life. Rather die than be disloyal. The words were just powerful. And for me, it was a great example of the empowerment and the engagement of a second language, because we were speaking in what's a second language to me in Korean. Well, language is the vehicle for engagement and empowerment. Learning a second language increases one's options for engagement and empowerment. It doubles one's options for engagement and empowerment. So I hope that we can all continue to learn second languages. And then as a side, I hope the Korean language still continues to grow in America. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. And so I'm gonna just present the second presentation, and let me just prepare for the slide presentation. Okay. So I'm gonna thank you for Dr. Peterson, because it really, just lay out the follow-up story. Like I am focusing on more contemporary phenomena with the big Korean wave, and then focusing on the language of BTS, K-pop, and ARMY, and talk about its impact in the digital era. So, like a French sociologist and also intellectual defined the cultural capsule as the accumulation of the knowledge, behaviors, and skills that promote the social mobility. And since then, like also the language has been viewed as a major cultural capital that works also. It's a major resource for mediating human interaction, and also, it's a tool for empowerment, and then contribute to the power dynamics at the various level. And Dr. Peterson's presentation clarified it. So this presentation, I will focus on examining the language of BTS K-pop and their fandom ARMY, and also identify their messages about the engagement and then empowerment in conjunction with their dynamic social activism on the digital platforms. And I also would like to think about how the Korean language and education may understand these messages from the global youth, and then think about making significant contributions to achieve SDGs in the future. So as we know, the global K-pop, the popularity is prevalent already. So it was good to hear about the whole struggle at the beginning of the, the Korean studies, and then the pioneers like Dr. Kang and Dr. Peterson also really made a big contribution, but it was a real struggle. But now with the K-pop popularity, and it's the Washington Post, homepage, like asking like how K-pop conquered the universe. So it is an unquestionable phenomena, and BTS syndrome is covered through over the past years. Like there are so many news about their breaking records, including billboards and YouTube and Guinness World Records. And Guinness World Record wise, BTS broke their 25 new records, and in only 2021 they broke 13 records. So that shows the power. And with that increasing just the popularity of K-pop, it is important to recognize also the surge of the enrollment increase in the Korean language classroom, and also Korea-related courses in Korean study. So Dr. Peterson's presentation also talked about that position of the Korean language education in the foreign language education in US, but also it's not a surprise that BTS also involved with the Korean learning textbook. So there is a new textbook, Learning Korean with BTS, so which is a very bestseller, also very popular. So with this kind of just increasing popularity in the fandom, the people commonly ask like, why their music, why BTS, among also particularly among K-pop artists, like people are brainstorming try to analyze what are the driving force that made BTS so popular and leading position. And in the interview with the co-CEO Bang Si-hyuk, who was in Big Hit and Entertainment, now HYBE, but he, in the interview with the Time 2019, he pointed out 3 things about the special aspect of BTS: sincerity, consistency, and their ability to embody the spirit of the times. And I think that the spirit of times, tell a lot of things. And then what is the spirit of times? Then what message they spread globally? So as a linguist, I got curious. So, there is an ongoing study in collaboration with my colleague, and then comparing BTS song lyrics with other K-pop artists' lyrics. And then it's a tentative result, but we found quite some interesting keywords in comparison with the other K-pop artists, BTS songs. Actually, there are some recognizable keywords. English, of course, and English appears in K-pop songs quite commonly, but among them, like 2 words like tear and respect, they were more like distinct in these BTS songs. And also in terms of adjectives and verbs, and I didn't add the English translation, but some adjectives like weak or scared or hurtful, and those adjectives, and also get angry and then get furious, and those verbs appear, and it's sharing that vulnerability of the global youth, and then their frustration, internal frustration. So, and BTS is really just representing the emotion and then empathy for this group. And also there is a proper noun, actually putting colloquial pronoun you in the subject position. So of course the you appears all over the K-pop songs, but particularly in BTS songs, and there are many lyrics having you as the subject. And with that also, we look at some special features related to semantic interpretation, and then categorize some of the, just the semantic characteristics, including vulnerability, and also like fall, fear, and anger. Those words appear. And also there are other pronouns like I love and you and me. And this part is not quite BTS unique, and these pronouns are very common all over the K-pop songs. However, in BTS songs, self-love is quite emphasized. So, I love myself, and then love yourself, and that is quite distinct. And also there are more words indicating positive future, in spite of all the struggles like fury and then anger, but they also propose like dreams and tomorrow good day, and also light. So there is some of the message we can extract from their songs in the context. And if we see the language of K-pop, and it's a mixture of the English and then Korean nowadays. So in 2006, like Jamie Lee analyzing K-pop songs, and she noticed that lots of English words are used. And then she talks about that actually in the Korean society, it creates a hybridity to establish the modern identity among the youth. So that modern identity includes like some of the properties of being international, progressive, futuristic, and fun-loving. But in the recent article, just doing discourse analysis with the BTS dialogues, and Joo Kim pointed out BTS as a method to establish counter-hegemonic hegemonic culture with marginalized or non-Western culture in the network society. And so in this process, one unique thing is like BTS songs are usually shared in Korean, right? They are not, like, there are English songs recently, but original popularity came from Korean. And then BTS fans are like avid Korean language learners. So that suggests like, okay, the Korean language works as a new medium for this new young global community of youth. So there is kind of interesting mixture of English and Korean, but also very dynamic linguistic exchange by using these languages. And in addition to language itself, and also I noted also the very dynamic social activism of BTS and also their Phantom Army. So you may remember BTS $1 million donation for the Black Lives Matter in 2020. That was quite shock, especially attracted a lot of attention from the Western media. And then in line with that, they're BTS fan, like avid fan army, and they raised another $1 million. So that was very touching and moving, but a surprising fact is that they raised that 1 million within 24 hours by using the digital platforms. And then, so they demonstrated the social mobility they acquired by using the digital technology. And of course, with this social activism, and then it is quite natural to see that the most retweeted tweet of 2021 is from BTS, and it's Stop Anti-Asian Hate. So that has been retweeted 1 million times. So that was the record in 2021. But with this kind of dynamic social activism on the digital platform using social media, and there is some of the, just the transformation among the K-pop fans. So I would say there is a transition from the K-pop fans to K-pop stans. And stans actually, there is no clear distinction, but in terms of the K-pop stans, and it includes a lot of people from very different backgrounds, like different age groups, races, and then ethnicities and sexualities. So, and it was quite distinct overall, especially the last year with the presidential election going, and then with the Trump rally and BTS Army also, made some political move by, just getting actively involved with this kind of politics. And it is quite not a surprise that BTS, Twitter is a very strong platform they share, but also they were the number 6, BTS as a group, like most tweeted in 2020. But among all the politicians, but the number 3 is also BTS Jungkook. Then he was the number 3 next to the Joe Biden, and then surpassing actually Obama at that time. So the digital platform is quite interesting to look at in terms of the communication also. So in line with this kind of digital social activism, it is quite natural to see that BTS is representing as envoys for SDGs. Especially last September in United Nations General Assembly, BTS made a very touching speech for the global youth and emphasizing climate change. And also they emphasized the hope for the future and also COVID-19 vaccines. So they are also engaged in this dialogue, and you can expect that also their fandom also, by following, and also just not only following, they're leading their loving artists, and then Army's engagement with SDGs is very visible. And one example, this is the homepage. It's from the homepage of One in an Army, one of the largest organization, the Army organization that connects armies. So armies grew so much, and it's not like harmonized and one kind of entity anymore. They include a lot of diverse small groups, and they have a different vision, and then they actually celebrate diversity, but they also want to be connected together. So, and then they actively, just engage in the charity and then also connect with other organizations dedicated to causes for environment and then climate change and then other social justice also. So Army uses a lot of like the linguistic movement, including translation. So in order to get connected, language is the major tool. And then there are voluntary translation groups. And then there are some recognizable translation teams in Twitter, but it's not only Twitter, in social media, and you can easily identify the translation teams. So they form virtual transnational community, but also they make efforts to overcome the language barriers and economic barriers. So instead of paying the expensive translation, then they want to do it themselves also. So this is the community build-up efforts, but also this represents the self-empowerment also. So Army's engagement, one of the good examples is that their Army Census they did last year, less than 3 months. And this survey was created by armies and also translated into 46 different languages. And then the final responses they got is incredible. It's over 400 to 2,000. So approximately 403,000 responses. And then in that survey, they identified that they share social interest in the social activism. And also they have a common interest in equity, education, environment. That is so naturally aligned with the SDGs. So this actually, the language of BTS, K-pop, and Army represents the various messages about transnational identity of the global youth, especially millennials and then Gen Z. But also they show that demands from the global youth to explore the various spheres of life across humanities, education, and racial and then gender equity, and by using that dynamic digital platforms and then tools. And also they sponsor for counter hegemony of global culture. And also the main factor is open communication channel and empathy and unison. And then some of the critical keywords are aligned with SDGs. So I identify equity, environment, gender, and education in particular. And also there are multilingualism and also digital activism became the driving force of shifting transcultural practice of the world. And I know that I'm a little bit over time. And I'd like to suggest at the end, in Korean studies, not only the Korean language and education, not only teaching the Korean language and culture, assuming that people love learning Korean culture and language, but also we need to learn from the language of BTS, K-pop, and their Phantom Army, and what messages they are sending us. And last thing I'd like to emphasize is also language can be a tool, and it's the learning tool about the SDGs, and we can utilize it, very efficiently and then harmoniously with by getting connected with other disciplines in the Korean studies. Okay. So I'm a little bit over time, but I'm so sorry, but I will just hand it over to the Dr. Kang.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Lee, for such a wonderful presentation, and shows us how powerful the language is, and Korean wave as well as Korean language is. In my presentation, I think I'm going beyond language and culture and talk a little bit more about the future direction of probably Korean language education. This is the outline, and actually, as Dr. Peterson and Dr. Lee mentioned, Korean Wave certainly stimulates the interest in Korean language and culture learning, and the enrollments in Korean language classes in the US institutions of higher education grow rapidly for the last decade. Yet, the percentage of Korean language enrollment is less than 1%, or more accurately, 0.1% of all foreign language enrollments. This tells us that probably we should not rely on Korean Wave only and do more jobs or duplicate or create more Parasite or Squid Games or produce more BTS type of entertainers and things like that. But again, we have a lot of work to do to attract more students in Korean language education. Anyway, on the other hand, since foreign language enrollment in general is declining, as Dr. Peterson mentioned, the most commonly taught languages like Spanish, French, and other languages are leading strategic approaches to strengthening or re-establishing foreign language programs nowadays. One of the examples is that efforts to cultivate more interdisciplinary approaches that grow by motivating beyond isolated language and culture education to connecting or integrating language education with into various academic disciplines such as STEM, science, technology, economics, the mathematics, or artificial intelligence, medical field, you name it, as well as social sciences, literature, and the usual humanities disciplines. So the concept of this connection has been one of national standards for foreign language learning since 90s in the States. It says that foreign language learners should be able to connect language and culture with their disciplines, own disciplines, through content-based, project-based, problem-based, or problem-solving approaches. At the same time, leading foreign language groups have initiated implementation of United Nations Sustainability Development Goals in reformulation of their curricular design, as most institutions of higher education in the States officially added SDG in their educational standards. According to UNESCO, definitely language is important because through language, people communicate, share meaning, and experience their sense of individual and community identity. This is actually somewhat aligned with what Dr. Peterson already mentioned, language as a vehicle for engagement and empowerment, I believe. So UNESCO's the educational guidelines for SDG actually emphasize that SDG should address the role of communication in the process of peacekeeping and security in a current world in crisis. This tells us that language education field is actually the pivotal or the key field that should lead the implementation of SDG goals in their standards more than any other disciplines. And definitely the guidelines also emphasize that the reformulation of any curricular design should take evidence-based research into account. So in this presentation, I'm going to share with you what actually the language education field has started to implement SDG in their new curricular design. Unfortunately, Korean language field is a little bit behind there. So I'm going to share with you some of the leading examples of these most commonly taught languages a little bit, and then what locally Korean course has attempted to follow the steps here. Here I'm sharing with you the French sample where actually, who is that? The Khan and Rodick 2021, actually they actually redesigned the second year French course for the entire semester to incorporate this sustainability issue in their course. Second year is pretty elementary course, but it's interesting that the students in this French course are asked to study and research French charter, environmental charter. This is a French government environmental charter. So it's about environmental law and practice, including all kinds of environmental issues there. So students, this is, I believe it is a pretty long text, and students are asked to analyze these the text first and then explore French attitudes toward environmental issues through interviews interviews of native speakers, I believe, and perform debates as delegates in National Assembly in France. So actually the instructors conducted the end of course survey, and students' answers show that they believe their skills were improved, research skills were improved, and also their pathways of exploring French culture was individualized and deepened, and their engagement with environmental sustainability is expanded through exposure to historical, literary, cultural, and political perspectives. So this was a real good model developed in 2015, so about I think 7 years ago, and I think French and Spanish language professionals are actually adopting similar models in their new curricular design. So I'll skip Spanish sample here because it is quite similar and we don't have enough time. So in fact, the Korean sample here is the sample from my school's 5th year Korean course. This course is called actually Korean Society in Media for level 5. It's a pretty high level Korean course. And the pedagogical method used in them are basically similar to the French course. And students were tasked to do research on Nanjido environmental sustainable project in Korea, including steps of sustainable waste management and environmental impacts on the society, landfill problems, and solutions. These are all in Korean, done in Korean. Then they are asked to compare it with Fresskills Park in New York, Staten Island in New York, which is known as world's largest landfill. And the project of redevelopment is expected to complete in 2035, I heard. So they were asked to research on Fresco's Park environmental sustainable project and compare it with Nanjido project. And then they do debates on landfill problems and solutions. This project does not create only the rosy outcomes, but it has also all kinds of potential problems. And anyway, all kinds of activities are included there, which I cannot say all here. And then students' end of course survey shows that their understanding and engagement in environmental sustainability were expanded. And actually one of the students in the class was empowered and or motivated to join an environmental activities group in her neighborhood, which was in New York City. So it was a very interesting experience. The second topic I want to share with you is non-proliferation studies. This topic is especially critical for Korean language learners, higher level Korean language learners, because there are a few Korean graduate students whose research focus on North Korea and its nuclear program, of course. And actually for this interdisciplinary study, I had a Russian model back in Defense Language Institute, which trains conference interpreters for very high-level treaty negotiations between Russia and America. This program has similar format as in the French sample, where content-based and project-based learning are adapted, and students do research on related resources and get engaged in debate, simulated role plays, consecutive or simultaneous interpretations, etc. The graduates of this program actually participate in very high level negotiations in real life. So we followed a similar model, same model actually for creating Korean model. And then for Korean model, there's no single treaty between North Korea and America or North Korea and South Korea. In fact, we have students study NPT, which is Non-Proliferation Treaty for International Community. So students are asked to study NPT in relation with North Korea and inter-Korea inter-Korea joint statement, yes. And so we focus on language skills, which are most likely negotiation skills, persuasion skills, and discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis or conversational analysis to understand the linguistic or sociolinguistic interactions between at least North Koreans and South Koreans. And we do a lot of simulated debate on realistic nuclear issues and case studies, definitely. And then we ask students to create their own glossary for studying further in this field. So in fact, we also followed the Russian model and started teaching consecutive interpretation and simultaneous interpretation skills in collaboration with our graduate school program, where students are learning the interpretation skills. Yeah, so and also we introduce a lot of intercultural notions to raise or to train our students to build their intercultural competence. So a lot of things are involved in this project, and we have implemented this project already, I would say, three semesters. And then students are all mentioned in their end of course evaluations that they were surprised that they learned a lot about North Korean nuclear program and also MPT in Korean language course. And they feel that they learned they improve their Korean proficiency as well as understanding of North Korean nuclear program, and they feel a little bit more confident to interact or to communicate with North Korean speakers, actually, and they are empowered to contribute to the problem solving in these very critical issues. So before I close my presentation, I will show you what kind of activities students do in order to learn negotiation skills, language skills for negotiation. Well, it takes so many different steps, but even before they do the negotiation itself, we have students to study the way or the expression, the way that North Koreans speak and South Koreans speak, and what are the cultural aspects behind all the negotiations, and also definitely American negotiation style probably is quite different from Korean ways. These kind of things, we don't prescribe anything to students, but with raw language materials, we have students themselves to come up with their own analysis and compare American ways with Korean ways or North Korean ways. So in fact, one of the sample texts that students were supposed to analyze are these two texts. It shows that these two texts are actually newspaper clips published in 2018 when North Korea and South Korea had a friendly summit talk. Things changed a lot, but at that time, North Korean leader actually met with the South Korean president. And on the left side in the presentation slide, you see that how Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, showed his humility to South Korean leader. And you can see all these very polite expressions that he expressed at that time. And on the right side, you see quite different expressions given by Kim Jong-un about a South Korean president. So when I asked students to look at these two newspaper articles and find all the expressions that North Korean leaders gave, oh my, this is, I'm sorry, it takes a little bit longer time. And yeah, and then they come up with their own questions and started debating on that, such as what cultural aspect do you decode from the North Korean leader's language in the two different news items? One makes North Korean leader change his attitudes drastically. Are the opposite expressions strategically planned? If so, why? Such questions they gave themselves, and then they started discussing and come up with their own conclusions. With these baby steps in mind, I would suggest expanding and implementing various interdisciplinary studies between language and different disciplines for more sustainable Korean language education in the future. I want to close my talk with a cheering quote from Nelson Mandela here. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you. And you know, we are the language teachers and we love language. So we talk a lot. So sorry about that, you know, just getting longer. But thank you, you know, Dr. Peterson and also Dr. Kang. And yes, I hope that we can continue this dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, professors. We have witnessed the sweeping popularity of K-culture and its astonishing potential as a vehicle for achieving SDGs. What I find interesting was how language learning itself is being transformed to accommodate and embrace SDGs. Thank you again for your presentations, professors.
The last session